Welcome to the Future of Wellness, exploring self-transformation and holistic healing to unlock your inner potential. Hosted by Christabel Armston and Keith Parker. Hello and welcome to the Future of Wellness. Today we're joined by Dr. David Berceli. David is an international expert in the areas of trauma intervention and conflict resolution. He is the creator of tension and trauma releasing exercises and author of The Revolutionary Trauma Release Process and Shake It Off Naturally. His revolutionary technique is designed to help release the deep tension created in the body during a traumatic experience or through chronic stress. Dr. Berceli holds both an academic and experiential grounding in psychotherapy and therapeutic bodywork. David has spent 2 decades living and working in 9 countries, providing trauma relief workshops and designing recovery programs for international organizations around the world. He has lived and worked extensively in Israel, Palestine, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Yemen, Egypt, and Lebanon. His keen understanding of the dynamics of religion and ethnic customs has allowed him to develop unique and specific processes that enable people from all parts of the world to manage and move beyond personal trauma, as well as bring healing and reconciliation between diverse groups. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us today, David.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to our talk together.
Let's start, if it's okay with you, by covering the foundations of your innovative trauma release technique. What is it exactly and how does it work?
Well, it is really quite simple. It's activating that shaking mechanism in the body that many of us get when we're scared, or even when we're excited. We're going to get on a roller coaster and the roller coaster is frightening, but we get on it anyways, and we shake. You, in a mild car accident, as an example, and you get out of the car, you're not injured, but you have to get your driver's license to show it to the police officer, and you find that your hand is shaking. Well, unfortunately, the narrative or the paradigm we have in the medical model is that shaking is bad and that we should stop it. And trauma releasing exercises is recognizing, my God, that shaking is the very thing the body is needing to get itself out of the tight contraction, the fear, or the high levels of anxiety it's experiencing, and that we live in a biological organism that knows how to access that mechanism very simply and use it to our advantage. So it's really activating this shaking mechanism that we're genetically encoded with, and then learning how to use it effectively inside the body.
And it's useful to let our listeners know that we just did a TRE session with you, David. You were generous enough to provide us with a direct experience to inform this conversation, and that can be a big part of what we talk about here together. And just again to thank you for that demonstration and the healing that has come from it. Before jumping into our experiences or things related to it, I'm curious if we could touch into how did you first arrive at this idea for TRE? What was the circumstance?
Okay, here we go. I'm going to make a huge 5-year story into 3 minutes here, okay? So I was living in the Middle East, and I was living in countries that were experiencing war. Now, what's really fascinating to me, even as I reflect on it, is that I saw something that all of us see and all of us understand, but I simply asked different questions about it. Here's the first thing I saw. When there was a loud bombing or shooting started, we would all duck like this, okay? Well, this is typical. It's a fetal response. And so if I was standing up, you'd see it pull all the way from the psoas muscle, and my whole torso would bend forward. That's how we duck. But what was interesting about it when I was living in war is I watched people from all over the world do exactly the same thing. But none of us were trained to do it. No one ever told us this is what you do if somebody's shooting at you. And I thought, oh my God, this has something to do with a genetic encoding for our species to survive on the planet. We're genetically encoded with this reflex reaction. So when I saw that, and all of you know that, you'll shake your head and say, yeah, I know what that is. Well, how come somebody didn't ask the question, what part of the brain does that? What muscle pattern in the body creates that movement? And how can it do it in 1 second? So it can't be the ego. That's the cortex. It's too slow. So it has to be subcortical regions of the brain. So I thought, okay, that's a natural impulse. It comes from a place where heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration come from in the brain, instinct reaction. Cortex isn't even involved or only partially involved. The other thing was what muscle patterns go down the front of the body that pull us into a fetal response, because that very specific pattern in every culture around the world, every country, does not matter what your nationality is or anything about you. You're a living human organism, and all of us are genetically encoded the same way. And so I saw this and I thought, all right, let me study the patterns in the body, the muscle patterns in the body that create that. So that was my first beginning to understand something's going on that's important, and I was curious enough to pursue it. So I figured out what part of the brain does this, what muscle pattern in the body does this. So then the second response was, if there's a muscle pattern designed to do this, to create a protective mechanism, there has to be a reverse response genetically encoded in the body. It has to be there. Otherwise, we would die as a species, actually. So we have to have both the yin and the yang movement of the body. And so then I thought, all right, if we put the body into the reverse position of the fetal response, which is what you did in the exercise, knees were open, pelvis was up, the whole front of the torso was exposed. That's the opposite of the fetal position. And all we did was remember I told you, I was just looking to destabilize that fetal response that's inside of all of us. So if I stretch it out, it starts to move. And then when we set the pelvis down, and then we started to get the tremor response. Now, the tremor response, the way I recognized that one, was that I was in a situation where we were in a bomb shelter, and I had two little boys sitting on my laps, and they were facing each other, and I put my hands on their backs. And I could feel how they were tremoring in terror because it was a very frightening situation. But what was really interesting, I looked around the room and I saw all the little children tremoring without inhibition at all. But when it got to be about 11, 12, or 13-year-olds, both the boys and the girls, they were starting to tremor, but they were trying to control it. And none of the adults were tremoring at all. And so at the end, when we got out of the bomb shelter, I asked the adults, I said, do you ever tremor the way the children do? And they said, oh, no, we don't want them to think we're afraid. And that's when a light bulb went off. And I thought, oh my God, we're missing it. The children are showing us the natural organic impulse of releasing stress and anxiety right in the midst of the situation. Whereas the adults had completely frozen that organic response, much like we do as adults, even with crying. When we're 2 years old and we fall and we hurt our knee, we cry freely. When we're a teenager and fall and we hurt our knee, we might cry, but you can tell we'll try to hold it back. And an adult, you could fall and break your knee and you won't cry. So we're somehow disturbing the natural impulse of the human body. We've interfered with it. And so I put those two together, the fetal response, extending or hyperextending that fetal pattern, and then letting the tremor mechanism come in, and it worked. And the tremor mechanism needs to follow that pattern of contraction that we create in life, because it will completely undo it. It will constantly release it, so that we are actually a self-regulating species. That's what we don't realize. We should never be up at these high stress levels. We have a tremor mechanism that as soon as the nervous system gets too elevated, it should kick in immediately. We should start to tremor and it'll just calm us right back down again. And so we are a self-regulating species, but without that mechanism, we've just driven ourselves up into this high state of anxiety and trauma, and we can't get out of it. And we can't get out of it because the organism needs that tremor mechanism to actually reduce it from the organismic level, which is what you just experienced.
Thank you, David. What was so striking to me in experiencing the facilitated session was exactly what you've just described. It was a permission slip in order to connect to the dialogue, this organic dialogue of the tremor response, which is initially induced as from that holding pattern, as you say, so that we're able to establish what felt like a very subtle and nuanced connection to the body intelligence without getting in the way of it. It wasn't about analyzing it. It wasn't about telling a narrative or what memories am I seeing, what am I experiencing per se, just purely remaining with the body. And that seemed to have an exceptional amount of potency.
Yeah, I think that's true because we don't know how to do that often. Oftentimes, when we're exploring the body, we're still doing it from our heads, whereas the tremor mechanism is activated from the nervous system and it works through the myofascial patterns. So you're actually becoming the observer of the living organism in which you are living. And it's actually doing its own thing. You're just the outside observer watching it and feeling it, and you're not interfering with it. So it's showing you, oh, here's where I can go. Here's what needs to release next. Here's the new pattern that we're able to access now because of it. And it does this all by itself. You just literally lay there. I tell people you could read a book or watch TV. It won't matter because the tremor mechanism is the response and it knows what to do and it knows how to do it, whereas the ego would be completely confused.
And to use a quote of yours, you're saying that TRE can help the individual to discharge tension from the body, which does not require revisiting the story, or often does not require revisiting the story. What are the advantages of not having this intellectual or narrative focused aspect of a trauma during a healing session?
Well, I work with soldiers a lot, and they're the best example of this for me. So they have a lot of trauma that they've experienced when they were overseas in some sort of war situation. So they'll come back and they don't want to talk about anything. They don't want to re-image this, and I understand that. So I'll do TRE with them, and they'll start to tremor. But I could see in their hip, all right, your left hip is moving different than your right hip. Now, there's a reason for that. And I'm just pointing it out to you. Does it make sense to you? And you don't have to tell me about it, but your body is healing that right now. They will, for like 2 minutes, they'll just be quiet. And then without the emotional content, because it's no longer there, it started to release from the body. The neurophysiological pattern is already healing itself. They will say, that was when the IED went off, the improvised explosive device went off. I got banged up against the truck or the tank or whatever. I hurt my left hip, and it's never been the same. I said, well, your body's healing it right now because it has no intention of holding on to that story. It doesn't need it for anything. All it wants to do is heal itself. And now all of a sudden, they're telling me this story as a healing moment in the present moment, and they're not telling it to me from the past. And not only that, they're actually healing it, which is what they want to do. Their body's doing it right now. So it actually brings them into the present moment to tell the story rather than revisiting it as a past experience.
I'd love to walk people through a bit of just what it is we did in the practice so they get a sense of this. Is it fair to say, David, that it was a good example of a TRE session?
Yeah.
So you guided us to basically position our bodies in such a way while we were lying down, such that we kept a certain tension in the legs by almost pressing the legs or thighs together from the ground. I'm not getting super detailed, but the point is we charged up the body by creating a situation in which we maintained a level of tension in our movement. And that tension built up, and you guided us to shift the patterns of the body posture such that we found a point at which that tension could find a maxim or an access point to the activation of the neurogenic tremor. And then once that was kind of activated, then you guided us to shift the body so that tremor could then start to work its way through the body and express through the body. And I find it really interesting that you're talking about the front of the body being the embryological kind of holding, or the fetal position, right? Because for me, the word that just kept coming up during the session that was surprising to me was spring loading the spine. And I'm used to doing a lot of back bends coming from a yoga background and doing, a lot of compression in the spine. And that's essentially what we were doing when we were building the charge. And that is the opposite direction of the fetal response. And so by spring loading the spine in that way, in a sense, it's almost like we charged up the spine. We like built up this energetic bubble or node or charge. And then once it could be distributed, we dropped it in the system, and then it started to move around and create shaking that naturally found places where discharge was needed in the body. It was a really, really helpful exercise, very insightful and very healing. So thank you. Do you think I characterized that well, or where would you want to add to things for people to visualize or get a sense of how it might go?
No, I like the way I like your vocabulary. It's different from mine, but it's for your audience, so I really like it. But it's exactly all we did. We just put the body in the position that helped create this charge, and then we took the charge out, and then slowly kept changing the charge and the position of the body to assist the tremor mechanism to activate. What's really interesting is that this is so organic to the human body that the two of you didn't even know exactly what was going to happen or what it would even feel like. And yet we're genetically encoded with this, that we should have had this from childhood. But unfortunately, the narrative, which still exists today, is if you tremor in public, you're afraid, you're vulnerable, you're weak, you're insecure. Every negative narrative that we could put on it, we have. And yet it's one of the healthiest mechanisms in the human organism. And we've negated it, and then when we experience it, we don't like it because it's usually coming during some stressful event or something like that. But it's the healthiest thing our body can do.
I'm interested, David, when you say about that negating it. When we use the language of stuck energy, let's say, leaving the body or energy returning to the body, how is it that you define what this energy is?
Well, if you think that we're an amoeba in my mind. We're a living, pulsating organism. We're not a brain and a body or a head and a body. That completely distorts how we should be inhabiting ourselves. And what I think as a living organism pulsating on this planet, I am both energy and I am matter. And being human is about the interplay between those two, not preferring one to the other, which we have a lot in our society. People want to do all this stuff to get out of their body because they don't like the feeling of it. I don't believe that's helpful at all. I believe that we are an integrated species of flesh or tissue and energy. Now, if you think that when we have contraction patterns like this in our body, which we do throughout our whole body, we have contraction patterns. Well, the tremor mechanism just comes along and starts to release those. When it does that, the energy that you've been using to hold the body is no longer being held to hold it. Now it's more available to you. So you're actually raising your vibrational frequency or the energetic charge in your body by releasing the places in your body that were holding the tightness. So the more tightness we release by the very nature of the organism in which we live, we actually generate energy.
A number of prominent trauma healing models have been introduced and integrated in the past few decades, in particular, practices related to, for instance, Stephen Porges's Polyvagal Theory and Peter Levine's Somatic Experiencing. Can you help us to contextualize TRE in this growing field?
Yeah, well, Stephen Porges talks about we're a co-regulating species. That's his big thing. Polyvagal theory is co-regulation. That we are basically, although we're individuals, we're in some ways a living organism together. And he always tells me that the tremor mechanism works so well because I develop the relationship with the individual, and the more the safety is created, the stronger and easier the person can give into the tremor mechanism. And there's validity to that. I'll agree with that. I still think if I was isolated on an island, I could still heal, but that's a different story. So that's what Stephen Porges would say. Now, Peter Levine, when we talked about it, is that he accesses the tremor mechanism through a more traditional psychotherapeutic process. So he'll talk to you about what's going on. He'll ask you to give you images or give you ideas, or is there an emotion? So it creates this huge dialogue that goes on. And in that process, at some point, people will begin to tremor. When I lived in war, first of all, I was living with millions of traumatized people, and I didn't speak their language very well, although I speak Arabic quite fluently, but not well enough to do psychotherapy. And psychotherapy doesn't work in many cultures because it's a Western concept. It doesn't belong in every culture in the world. So what I was challenged to do, and this was valuable for me, as a psychotherapist going to the Middle East, and I had body awareness too, I was trained as a massage therapist, but that whole paradigm was just broken because it didn't work in war. I couldn't, take 1 million people one day at a time, bring them into counseling and doing therapy with them. The narrative or the paradigm was broken. It didn't work. That's one of the reasons why I had to see differently, is because the paradigm I brought was ineffective. But when we have to work with large populations, which is a little bit more of what TRE is about, I can put 300 people on the floor and get all of them to do exactly what happened to the two of you with as little ease as I did it today. It's not that complicated. So the difference between TRE is I don't look to access the brain. I literally look to access the nervous system in the body structure itself. So I completely circumvent cognition or ego, and I get the myofascial muscle and the nervous system with muscle spindle fibers involved in it. They're the ones that start activating, and because our body can. And so it starts doing that. And then, as you both did so very well, you just kind of stay out of it, be an observer, watch what it does. But it actually knew how to move itself through your structure in ways that you would never have been able to cognitively know. So literally, we took out cognition and gave the body finally its real chance to show us how it knows how to heal itself.
I'm interested in the feedback you gave there regarding Stephen Porges's perspective of your role as facilitator. I understand from looking at your material that a TRE practitioner does need to develop assessment abilities to determine a client's profile and make an accurate assessment of how this modality, if you will, would work for them. But I'm intrigued particularly about your role in that session. For instance, when we came on the call before we got going, you said, I've already read your system, for instance. Now you're seeing head and shoulders here at that stage, although you saw full body during the session. And you also mentioned about whether or not we might require some prelim exercises based on what you'd assess. What's happening for you in that assessment process? Is this sort of psychic sensing, as it were, ESP? What are you reading in terms of the client's field or behavior?
Well, I think it's a little bit of all of it, although I don't say that I do ESP or psychic interventions or anything like that. But if I look at the two of you right now, and you can see this, Keith's right shoulder is higher than his left shoulder. It's that simple. So I know there's a contraction pattern in his body that's different, okay? Now, you don't have to change, but I'm saying I've watched millions of bodies at this point, and so I get a real quick indicator. Oh, I think I can see what's going to happen. I can almost see people's hips problems or knee problems. So it's just a little bit of fine attunement, which I could only get through experience. It's not really training somebody to see that way. And then energetically, it's just like, how do they respond to me? How do they interact with me? Are they easy? Are they comfortable? Do they feel comfortable within themselves? And so it was that little bit of dialogue that I could say, okay, these two are comfortable. This is going to be easy. We don't have to worry.
A brief pause to thank you for listening to this episode. If you're looking to take the next step in your transformation, find out how we can support you with our popular energy healing training, one-to-one private sessions, free resources, and more. Visit energyfielddynamics.com to learn more. In terms of people's accessibility to this or ease with which they can access it, what are the more challenging client or population circumstances you come into? The main things that come to mind would be like people not being able to get the tremor activated or initiated for whatever reason, their resistance, and then also when emotions may arise and just in general, how emotions play a factor into the common experience of this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, every human organism on the body on the planet can tremor. But you're right, it may be difficult for some people. So, and the difficulty could be physical, they're too tight, they can't let it go, or it could be a psycho-emotional issue. Let's talk about if a person has been raped, whether a man or a woman, as an example. just laying on your back with your knees open is a horribly vulnerable position if you have that experience in your body. Just the position itself could be frightening for people. See, and so their knees could be open. They could be afraid, but not even be aware that they're afraid. So they're already holding and contracting. And as we close the knees, a lot of time when people get tremors, that's the first time they've had stimulation in their body like this for years, maybe since a traumatic event. And so now the stimulation is new and the brain's interpreting it, this is dangerous. Last time you were stimulated, this is what happened. So don't experience stimulation anymore. And see, so now they've got this dialogue going on. So that's the one caveat where activating the tremor mechanism, you might need somebody to be with you. Doesn't have to be a clinical therapist. It could be a partner or a spouse or a friend if you feel close and safe. Safety is always the key word. And so they could feel unsafe, but still curious and want to tremor. So now we've got to play back and forth. So I'd have them maybe tremor for 2 minutes and stop, because I want them to see they're still in control. After they stop, I may talk to them for a little bit. How was that? I'll say, do you want to do it some more? If they say yes, we'll tremor again. So I actually take this big experience that the two of you had, and I break it down into very small pieces so it's manageable and accessible to the individual. Okay, so that's how you deal with emotional stuff. But also, Christabel, you had a little bit of an emotion too. But that doesn't mean that you need psychotherapy and you have to do all sorts of stuff. It means maybe you just need to cry, or maybe you just need to get angry or feel fear. But that, to me, is not only psychological, it's energetic as well. So you were saying what's in your heart, and I'm saying, well, you were moving your hands, and that's the heart meridian. And so maybe you were opening the heart meridian. That's a wonderful thing. If you can handle it, go ahead and cry, because this is what your body is telling you. Oh, great, we got the heart meridian open. Let it flow. See, so our body gets excited when we want to cry. It's not, our body isn't frightened with crying, only our brain is. It's actually quite safe and simple for everybody to do if they're just reducing like stress, anxiety, tension, and mild traumas, maybe from a sports injury or falling off a ladder or whatever, all those other traumas that are not so emotionally charged, then TRE is completely safe to do.
There was a beautiful moment there, David, in doing that hand opening exercise as part of moving the tremor through the body. And from my sensing, being able to connect that hand motion up through the arms, as you said, pericardium and heart meridian both running through there, and this charge or density in the heart as I was experiencing it, and feeling into that sort of sense of stuckness or holding. Could you talk a little bit about the process of following the body in the practice of TRE in this context?
Right. Well, what I tell people to do is let the tremor mechanism start to move itself through your body. We want to see how much can it do without any assistance from us, because it can do a lot, as you both experienced. But then when I begin to see patterns, like I saw in all of you, the tremor mechanism was clearly trying to come up your spinal column into your neck. There's no question in both of you. It was obvious to see, actually. It wasn't complicated. And then I thought, okay, well, let's loosen the shoulders. Let's loosen the hands, because I saw your right hand starting to move already a little bit. And so all we do is we move the structure, actually put movement in the myofascial patterns while it's tremoring. And if the tremoring can connect with it, it'll come up there. It will first oftentimes connect energetically, or let's say through the meridians or through the chakras, whatever your belief system is. It will release an energetic charge so that you could actually feel your hand moving. Or some people say, I feel tingling in my hands, but it's not moving yet. And then it will start to move. So remember, we're an energetic species in matter. And so it's the interplay we're always looking for. And the tremor mechanism is actually the interplay. It is energy moving matter.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because we're literally dealing with vibration. There's a subtlety between the words frequency and vibration that vibration is actually more mechanical. It's actually like sound is vibration more, whereas light is more frequency. And they're related, but they are different. And there's a denser, more mechanical aspect to vibration. That's why we can feel sound so easily in the low frequencies. And it makes me think, again, for people to get a sense, we created this charge. We spring loaded the spine in a sense, and then had this tremor get activated, and it started to circulate in the pelvis. That's where it seemed to naturally go, legs, pelvis. And then in terms of it expressing through the body, it was a matter of where does it want to go, and can we then guide it if we want up and down the spine or to different extremities. But it made me think, wow, this actually has some real overlap with words that come out of Kundalini traditions as well, where the word kriya and spontaneous vibration or convulsions that people's body go through in these deeper purificational or healing processes that's talked about. And I wondered, in all the amount of people that you worked with, or as a general topic, how this might overlap with more classical kinds of, bigger, let's say, spiritual openings, awakenings, Kundalini, etc.
Well, I think it fits in perfectly because I've worked with a lot of yoga people. When I first started developing TRE, I thought, oh, this is great. Let me go work with the yoga population. They should get this immediately and it should be easy. And that was completely untrue. And I was shocked. And that's not to say anything negative about the yoga community, but I was shocked that they were so flexible, far more than I was in my body. But still, that tremor mechanism did something completely different to them that they were shocked by and didn't know how this happened. But I think in the ancient tradition of yoga, truly, they knew this experience. They would have these convulsive releasing experiences. Whereas when we sort of brought yoga to the West, we put it way back in our heads again. So yoga became how to stretch and put yourself in different postures and that sort of stuff. But stretching, I discovered, and putting in different postures does not necessarily mean grounding and integrating at all. So it's two different things. So I think the tremor mechanism, for me, and I have a bias, but it's one of the purest forms that the body has to be able to create its dialogue between its energetic field and its material field. And that's why I told you, both of you, take a deep breath and let out a sigh. Let it go through the vocal cords, because like you said, sound we resonate with. And if you create sound in the vocal cords or vibration in the vocal cords, it will often connect with the vibration that's already going on in your body. And you can actually bring the tremor mechanism up the body by creating sound. Some people hum. I have a video on my YouTube channel recently. I was in Nepal, and a group of these young women, they were all Buddhist monks, women, and so they were tremoring on the floor. They loved it. Then I just said, why don't you chant while you're tremoring? And it completely changed their tremoring. So they added their own chanting, their own sense of feeling within themselves, whatever was spiritual for them, a place that they felt safe and comfortable. They added it to the tremor mechanism, completely changed the tremor mechanism. So all these other modalities, I keep telling people, just include this in it. This TRE isn't even exactly a modality. It's a genetically encoded mechanism in you. Use it in any modality that you feel comfortable with to enhance the effectiveness of that modality.
I love this emphasis on the interplay or the interface between the energetic and the physical. It certainly, from my experience, strikes true in terms of how that was processed through the body and my sensing. I appreciate you also mentioning the word grounding there. We have this idea of overcharging or grounding. And you mentioned during session how important it was for the energy to go down as much as for it to go up. And I wonder if you could extrapolate a little on those principles in the context of this work.
Yeah, well, grounding, I find that what I mean by that is we really do feel ourselves all the ways down to our feet. And I know a lot of people think that they do, and they might actually be able to feel their feet, but I'm not sure that they're energetically connected to their feet. And that's a different issue. And so it's like, all right, how do we get the energy to go down there so that they actually feel internally in their legs, in their ankles, and their feet, that they feel internally that there's a sort of stimulating aliveness there, not just that I can feel the ground, but there's actually something tingling inside there that I can feel. And basically what happens is we squeeze the structure, even if we don't do it visually. We might do it internally, but we actually pull up from our feet and our ankles because we actually want to run away. But we have to freeze that response because we're not able to run away from it. And so then all that tightness goes into the feet and the ankles and the legs. It desperately wants to run. And many people, when they do TRE, will get that running movement to occur in their legs, which is the final release that they've maybe been holding on to for 20 years. So the legs have to have their capacity to do what they were designed to do. And that was run away from danger, to get out of the threat. But when it's not able to do that, all it can do is freeze the impulse. That's our problem. It freezes the impulse. So not just in the tissue, but energetically freezes the legs. So we actually lose connection with the legs, even though we think we still have it. We don't know that we don't have it until it's restored. And you say, wow, I didn't realize I didn't feel my feet. I thought I did, but I didn't realize it until now I really have feeling in my feet and I can feel them. So that's one of the problems with going numb in our bodies, is that we can still think that we're inhabiting our bodies, but energetically the flow is not there, but we don't know that until the flow is restored.
Yeah, it's great that you're mentioning numbness, because in the session that we just did, the primary pattern that arose was in my left hip. And I was dialoguing with you during and told you that I was, aware of and had encountered this many times over the years. And at a certain point, as the sensation heightened, in a sense, what came was a perception of the numbness, or an almost the dissociation from my left leg, from the hip down. And I have some issues in some of the bigger quadricep muscles, even firing in the left leg above the knee. So it's interesting to say that, and the idea of embodying and being with the body, and how this practice can really get you in touch with areas that are not awake, not inhabited, not embodied, not energetically integrated. And I'm wondering, in terms of repetition, what do you see as like a pattern of practice for people doing this? Let's say they do it once and they get a certain result. What happens when they do this 5, 10, 20, 50 times? Does it keep going deeper? Does it clear the system at a certain point? I mean, there's never a zero, but what's the pattern over time with this?
Well, what I see in people is they'll do this quite regularly, like maybe 2 or 3 times a week. I always tell people, find your baseline, your comfort zone. That's where we always start. I'm not trying to push the body into some place. I'm not trying to blow it open or anything. I'm just trying to get it to kind of gently relax itself at the speed in which the body feels comfortable, and sometimes even your ego, because your ego might be afraid to go someplace that the body's ready to go to. Well, I want them to learn this dialogue. It's okay if the body wants to tremor in your shoulder, but you feel uncomfortable there, then don't go there. Just be patient. Just keep tremoring. At some point, you'll feel comfortable and you'll be able to go there. It means the brain and the body will have created this dialogue. They'll be in agreement with one another. So don't push. I don't agree with that at all. Over time, what's going to happen is people are they'll like it for like a month or 6 weeks or 2 months. And then they'll say, well, the same thing happens over and over. I don't feel any changes. Nothing's going on. Well, what basically happened is the body found all of the places that the tremor mechanism can release and create a greater flow of energy and a greater ease and comfort in the fluidity of the physical structure. So it did that. But it's like water. When it has an avenue that it can flow through, it'll just keep flowing through that same avenue. See? But it's not going down deeper because it's not being challenged to go deeper. So now the flow can just go over it. See? And so what they need a TRE provider for, somebody certified in this, is to watch the body and say, oh, it's just flowing over something, but there's something deep. So how do we change the body's posture or make some sort of intervention where we're forcing that mechanism to go here now to actually go at a deeper level? So it's really about levels and different fascial patterns in the body all releasing. So it's a matter of going down deeper and deeper. And so if people are creative enough, they can explore them by themselves. Otherwise, they might need somebody to watch them to help them see where the tremor needs to go, but it can't go because it has an easier route out of the body. And so that's what we do. We basically refine that.
There's such a strong parallel here with running energy, the way what we practice with energy healing, in that we introduce energetic flow within the aura, and the skillful practitioner is able to guide and facilitate the movement of that energy into harder and harder places to reach. So initially, you will get bigger changes faster on a lot of people, and then it becomes about nuance and refinement, where it does need to go to those places that are hardest to reach. And it's really a similar concept, one in the metaphysical domain, one in the physical domain, but that there's an energy flowing, and then that energy wants to flow in places it can access. And then at a certain point, certain places are very hard to access and allow for things to open up and break up.
I think that's perfect. This is where you're talking about the metaphysical and the physical. And I'm saying, yes, they both know how to interact with one another. We don't want to keep them separate. And the tremor mechanism, I believe, is what actually brings the metaphysical and the physical into dialogue with each other.
David had actually somewhat preempted what I was going to ask really very nicely in part of his reply before, but my question was really around self-practice and what is the appropriate approach to a self-practice, if there is one, in this context?
Well, yeah, I think every human being should do it, mostly because we're genetically encoded. So we should all explore what is our genetic encoding and what value does it have for us. And it should be a regular practice. Some people would do it every day. I do it every morning and every evening for just about 10 minutes, just to check my body out and see is there tightness or contraction somewhere. Now, some people do it maybe twice a week. If they're going through severe trauma and they're trying to recover from it, maybe once a week is all they could do. And some people can only do it for 5 minutes. Other people do it for an hour and say, this was amazing and I loved it. So the real problem with this is I don't want to give a recipe. I want to tell people, feel your structure. Today, you might want to tremor for 30 minutes and it feels amazing. And tomorrow you may say, oh, I don't feel like doing it. Well, you need to follow that feeling. You need to constantly keep giving your body access to this tremor mechanism, because it will keep showing you, yes, we're relaxed today, or no, we're not that relaxed. That being out in traffic and being at that meeting really tightened my body, but I didn't realize it psychologically. But I come back and my body says, no, you picked up a lot of tension. See, so we need to use it as sort of a diagnostic tool for us. And so we should be doing it as regularly as our body or even our psyche feels comfortable in doing it.
And to follow that up, David, I just wanted to ask, all these sort of years later, or in seeing your clients and fellow participants, what are the benefits that are being reported back to you from people who are engaging with this regularly? How is that reflected in their day-to-day life?
Well, I think what it does in the day-to-day life is it makes it smoother. Meaning we've all learned how to elevate and de-escalate and elevate and de-escalate. And so it creates this sort of easier flow through life and all the adversities that we're going through right now on the planet. But it makes you be able to step back and observe all of it out there. If you're talking in terms of what the two of you are doing, it generates without question a stronger energetic field. Makes me more sensitive and more protective in the sense that my field is stronger than some of the energy fields that I'm walking into. And so it does both. In a sense, it helps me pulsate both physically in connection to the earth, physical connection to the earth, as well as in the aura or the energetic field of me, because we are both. And it makes this energetic field stronger and bigger. When I work with 300 people at a time, I can feel that my energy field actually engulfs 300 people and holds a space for them to explore what they need to explore. But then afterwards, I'm tired. And so I have to do TRE to actually just look after my own energy field again.
For people who are curious about doing this themselves, are there any populations who this is contraindicated for?
Well, I think the ones, people who have physical injuries, as an example, they have to be very careful, but they could still do it. They just have to figure out ways around. They might not be able to do the simple exercises that we started with. And people who might have serious psychiatric problems, schizophrenics, borderline, manic depressive, suicidal ideation, those are rather serious things. And so what will happen is the body will open itself up, but they might not be able to handle what opens up. It's not that the tremor mechanism is dangerous for them. They are still dangerous to themselves. The tremor mechanism will help them actually become more integrated within themselves. I've only worked a little bit with bipolar or schizophrenia. And if I worked very little with them, a little bit at a time, like tremoring for just 5 minutes, they really enjoyed it. I have some parents who are teaching their children who have ADHD, and they love it. And I've worked with a number of people who are experiencing depression, suicidal ideation, and I'm convinced that depression and suicidal ideation is from the brain. It has nothing to, the body does not want to kill itself. The body doesn't want to harm itself. It's only a living organism. It just wants to pulsate life. But when I reconnect them to their body, that changes completely how the brain interprets that it hates life and that it wants to kill itself or something like that. So I think they really need a connection to the body to help them get out of the psycho-emotional pain that they're experiencing.
As we're drawing things to a close here, I'd love to ask you, where is it that people can find you? What are the sort of offerings that you have, and what can people do with you?
Okay, so they want to go to traumaprevention.com, and that's the main website where they could find a TRE provider or TRE training program, or free workshops that are being given over the internet. Because a lot of providers from around the world just do a session like every Friday. You can join in no matter where you are in the world and just tremor together with someone watching you. I have my own personal website, which is David-Berceli, and that's only because it's only got a little bit of stuff on it, but it shows I'm into videos a lot. I could explain this to you ad nauseum, but until you experience it, you don't really understand it. And so I just put a lot of visuals out there. So YouTube is David Berceli, Instagram is David Berceli. I'm on TikTok too, but I don't do a lot there, but I do post videos there. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, all that stuff. So you could find all that, but the value of what I'm doing is I'm just putting video after video out there. We've got about over 200 of them. Just different people tremoring from around the world. You watch them tremor. I suggest an intervention. We see if it helps, and then they sit up and tell us what it was like. So it gives people an experience, a visual experience of what it's like, but I have to laugh. I love watching it, but when I was teaching a group of firefighters not long ago, and I showed them some videos, but I showed them the videos after they had the experience, and they said, "Thank God you didn't show us those videos before we had the experience." The videos can be a little bit daunting maybe, or they look frightening to people. I don't have that experience. It's hard for me. But don't let the visual prevent you from having your own personal experience. See, because the personal experience is very different than visually watching it.
Well, we want to thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today. You're doing such amazing work. This is a real contribution to the world in terms of healing and understanding, and it's such a powerful mechanism that is so accessible. And we definitely encourage people to try things out. We will put all those links that you mentioned, your website and the TRE website, on the show notes. Much more to come.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, David. Real pleasure. Thanks for being a part of the Future of Wellness. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps us reach more people and to make great episodes like this one. Learn more about field dynamics and why we think the future of wellness matters. Check us out at energyfielddynamics.com. See you next time.